Few recent concept cars have captured the hearts and minds of automotive enthusiasts, or ended in such heartbreaking fashion as the Mazda Furai. Unveiled at the 2008 North American International Auto Show in Detroit, the Furai, which is Japanese for Sound of the Wind, represented the culmination of Mazda's Nagare design language, while simultaneously serving as a new rolling laboratory for the company's alternative powertrain technologies. More significantly for our purposes, it was explicitly designed as a bridge between Mazda's road car lineup and their occasional motorsport activities, particularly their endurance racing program. I say that like they had any other racing going on in the mid-2000s. I don't think they did. Actually, hang on, let me go look this up. Yeah, okay. Apart from the fact that, somebody's always racing a Miata, I don't think there was really anything notable going on, at least that was factory supported. So, the Furai's racing connections, again, went much more than skin deep. It was built on a modified Courage C65 LMP2 chassis that had previously been powered by a Mazda engine in the American Le Mans series under the banner of BK Motorsports. Thus, we had an aluminum and carbon fiber monocoque, but the comparatively pedestrian open-topped LMP2 bodywork was replaced by something that, in my opinion, was much, much better. This foundation provided both legitimate racing pedigree and ensured that the concept's performance capabilities, like that of the Peugeot Onyx that we already talked about, extended beyond just bench racing and computer simulations, and were actually genuinely track capable. Power came from a mid-mounted 450 horsepower 20B 3-rotor Wankel engine that was modified to run on E100 bioethanol. This was both a nod to Mazda's rotary heritage, though while the 787B had won Le Mans with a 5-rotor R26B power plant, the Furai's Zoom unit was a bit tamer. The choice of ethanol, on the other hand, reflected both the continuing focus on sustainability that one would expect from a French-led auto racing rule set, and the growing interest in alternative fuels at Le Mans and endurance racing on the whole. The American Le Mans series, in which Mazda had most recently been competing, had introduced their green racing protocols in 2008, alongside similar rules for Le Mans, which incentivized teams to experiment with alternative fuels and more efficient powertrains. So, you also had Audi using diesel with great success, and one of the advantages of a rotary power plant is that you can modify them to run on just about any combustible liquid without too many big design changes. So, why not bioethanol? And while 450 horsepower is admittedly a bit low for most of the potential competition in LMP1 or LMP2, the Furai did weigh in at a mere 675 kilos, or 1,488 pounds, which is 225 kgs less than the standard LMP1 weight minimum. The Furai's bodywork, on the other hand, penned by Mazda's design team under Franz von Holzhausen and Lorenz Vannenacker, was done in collaboration with Swift Engineering, which is much easier to pronounce, and translated the flowing Nagare design language into more functional aerodynamics and race car-focused bodywork. The carbon fiber bodywork surfaces channeled airflow to generate downforce while managing cooling for the mid-mounted rotary engine, because, as we all know, rotary engines make a lot of heat. Prominent and sculpted side air intakes fed the engine while continuing the visual drama that started with the front lighting. I call them filaments. There's probably a more appropriate word for it, but the integrated front splitter and substantial rear wing left no questions that this was no ordinary motor show concept car. Suspension was double wishbones all around with pushrod-activated coilover dampers. Again, standard fare for contemporary prototypes. The braking system featured carbon ceramic discs, or possibly carbon discs, with multi-piston calipers, while contact with the road was through 18-inch BBS center-lock wheels wrapped around specially developed Kumo racing slicks, which meant clearly competition was on the table. What earned the Furai inclusion on this list as a potential Le Mans competitor was both its timing and the, I think, pretty clear intent behind the design. In the late 2000s, we were seeing the FIA, the ACO, and to a lesser extent, IMSA start to tackle the questions of as environmental responsibility and sustainability, because, buzzwords. And while rotaries are not necessarily a conventional choice when it comes to being an eco-mentalist, they are kind of Mazda's thing. And the use of bioethanol did show that they weren't being entirely tone-deaf with the concept. Of course, we all know that Mazda does have a storied history at Le Mans, and with rotary-powered concepts, having won overall victory with 787B in 1991 after numerous earlier attempts, and some class wins with the lower-numbered 7X7 series of prototypes, and the Furai thus wore the number 55 as an homage to the Le Mans winner. I do have to say I'm in many ways glad they went with the stealth matte black color rather than the renowned high-vis livery, though, because I think this is one of my favorite menacing artistic car designs of all time, and bright orange and green probably would have undercut that somewhat. However, had Mazda decided to move forward and finish developing the Furai for competition, there still would have been challenges, most notably with adapting the rotary engine to more modern endurance racing requirements. As we've said before, rotaries are notorious for their fuel consumption and their heat generation and their oil usage, all of which are significant disadvantages when you've got to go around at 24 hours with maximum speed and maximum efficiency. But they were problems that Mazda had tackled before and emerged victorious, so a modern attempt would not have been unprecedented. If Mazda had wanted to send the Furai racing in LMP1, as I've said, they would have needed to further uprate the engine to compensate for the additional ballast they would have had to carry to make weight, or they would have had to seek an exemption from the FIA. I think a more likely path would have been an experimental entry, along the lines of what we saw with Garage 56, but of course Garage 56 didn't exist in 2008. We'd have to wait until 2012 for that particular loophole to open with the Nissan Delta Wing. Tragically, the Furai's story ended in flames, quite literally. During a Top Gear magazine photoshoot at Bentwaters Airfield in 2008 with Mark Ticehurst at the wheel, the Furai became the Fire Eye and was destroyed before firefighters could extinguish the blaze. The incident remained unpublicized and just the stuff of rumors. It was under investigation by Mazda for more than 5 years, until Top Gear was finally authorized to reveal what had happened to the car. There's no conclusive word on what started the blaze, but it originated in the engine bay, and Ticehurst wasn't initially aware of the fire until the chasing camera car managed to alert him to the danger. Some say it was an electrical fault, or possibly a fuel leak, but all we know is it wasn't put out in time. Ticehurst managed to stop and escape the car, but they were out of sight of the fire crew, who were near the pits, and with the wind on the car's rear quarter, the flames were quickly pushed towards the front of the car, and, as I think we all know, carbon fiber burns quite merrily when you give it some accelerant like E100 bioethanol. In less than 8 minutes, the car was completely consumed and then extinguished by the fire crew, who came too late to save the car from the furious blaze. Okay, that's 2 fire puns in one paragraph. We're going to leave it at that. The car's remains were secreted away to Mazda's Advanced Design Studio in California and have not been heard about since, but it's unlikely that the Furai will rise from the ashes anytime in the near future. Mazda did go on to build a more conventional prototype for competition in IMSA under the DPI rule set, but it lacked the Furai's fantastic looks, not really through any fault of its own, or its howling rotary, again, not really through any fault of its own, and we will talk about it at a later date, as well as why DPI never made it to Le Mans. That particular video script is looking like it's going to be a little bit over an hour and a half, so keep an eye out for that probably in May. And tonight, we're also going to have a brief dishonorable mention, as I just want to remind everyone that this horrible thing existed, cost the world a Lamborghini Mura as a donor car, and Mr. Colani had the temerity to call it a Le Mans Prototype, despite it being about as well suited for any form of motorsports as Lance Armstrong and Andy Fastow are to lead a series of ethics seminars. While I won't belabor the point too much further, as I've already discussed the car in an Oddity Week video about 1.5 years ago, I'm just going to touch upon the key points as it relates to eligibility for Le Mans. 1. Look at the damn thing. Crash safety would have been beyond non-existent, even given rather loose 1970s standards. I mean, the Porsche 917, you had your feet ahead of the rear or front axle, but still, you've got a joystick that looks like it came from the back room of an adult novelty store as the only means of controlling the thing. The two pylons that served as attachment points to the frontal pod for the engine unit don't look like they do really well at speeds exceeding 3. The inclusion of the French Air Force roundel makes precisely no sense, but again, concept, and the big plexiglass bubble would have ensured that any of the heat transfer mitigation benefits that you got from having the cabin separated from the engine unit were completely obviated by the fact that they would have been cooking the driver in a giant solar oven while blinding him with the glare from the all-white interior. Also note, no headlamps, so the midnight to 5 a.m. stints would have been particularly fun. Back in slightly less polemic worlds, of course, none of these concepts ever made it to Le Mans or any of the world's other racetracks for a competitive outing, but to me they do represent tantalizing what might have been if the wheel of fate had turned a slightly different way. Equally interesting is the fact that several of these manufacturers either did find future or have past success at La Sarthe, albeit with different machinery. Audi, of course, built their dynasty not with a W12-powered shiny aluminum coupe, but with the open-topped R8 and its diesel-powered successors. And yes, the R18, of course, was closed cockpit, while Mazda and Peugeot already had victory behind them before they built the cars that we looked at today. Would any of these concepts have been actually successful had they been developed for Le Mans? Of course, it's impossible to know with certainty, but I think each possessed characteristics that aligned with contemporaneous racing regulations and the technical mores of the time. The C111-2's aerodynamics and generally thoughtful design, the Avis Quattro's lightweight construction, the W12 Nardo's demonstrated capacity to run for 24 hours with no particular issues, the Onyx's clearly Le Mans-derived hybrid powertrain, and the Furai's pretty inarguable competition pedigree all represented approaches that would have probably provided at least a chance at victory in endurance racing had additional development work been undertaken. Perhaps in some parallel universe, we had the C111-2 challenging the Porsche 917 for dominance in 1972, the Avis Quattro competing against the McLaren F1 GTR in 1995 in GT1, the W12 Nardo dueling with the Audi R8 and the Pescarolos and the Cadillac LMP in the early 2000s. We had the Onyx facing off against Toyota and Audi in a combined GT LMP1 class. And we had the Furai carrying Mazda's rotary flame back to, that's a third or fourth flame pun. Never mind. Hopefully, also in a parallel universe, the Kalani never cost us a Mura. Well, it's happened again. You've wasted another 3/4 of an hour watching/listening to me ramble on about cars that never were. I do hope it's been an enjoyable spend of time. For this week's shameless plugs for relevant content on the channel, I'm probably going to miss a couple, but we've previously discussed. Group C as a class and history has its own video that probably merits an expansion at some point in the not terribly distant future, but I've got a few other pretty big video projects in the works, so that's probably not going to happen until June. We have the McLaren F1 GTR recently covered. GT1 gets discussed in DEFCON GT. GT classes explained with nuclear war. The Peugeot 908 HDI has a 5-minute guide, while the Hybrid 4 was in an earlier 5 cars. That video, the Audi R8 guide, was the first video on the channel, has had one re-record, and probably merits a deep dive because, let's be honest, it's one of the most successful Le Mans cars ever built. The Porsche LMP 2000 was in another earlier 5 cars. That video, as was the Mercedes 300 SLR. We've covered the Porsche 908, Mercedes W125, the Rekordwagen Streamliners, and the Colani Le Mans Prototype, all in their own videos, although I'm even more unkind to the Colani in the full-length video, so if you want to listen to me just tear something a new one for 5 or 6 minutes, that one's for you, but it is quite acrimonious. For this week's call to action, not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube:
like, comment, subscribe.
Remember to communicate, or over-communicate, your plans when you make them. Or you might be thinking you're headed into a nice weekend at a racetrack, only to find that your wife and your mother have planned a family weekend without telling you, and now instead of going to the Midi, you're going to a blueberry festival and a birthday party for someone you might have met once about a decade ago. Not that that's, deriving from very specific personal circumstances of the week. Yeah. Anyway, be that as it may, thank you as always for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and I wish you all good night and a good tomorrow.